Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Raclin Murphy Museum of Art. Lots of familiar faces, some new ones. My name's Joe Becker, and I'm honored to serve as the director and the curator of sculpture. On behalf of the museum and the Keough-Naughton Institute, I want to thank you for joining us this evening for an exciting conversation with Dr. Caroline Campbell, director of the National Gallery of Ireland. And it's a familiar face to some of you. I know she had a chance to meet with some students and some faculty today, so welcome to campus. A few introductory comments about Dr. Campbell and then about Dr. Stapleton. Born and raised in Belfast, Dr. Caroline Campbell became the director of the National Gallery of Ireland in November 2022. Before joining the National Gallery of Ireland, she was the director of collections and research at the National Gallery London. Earlier in her career, she held curatorial positions at the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, the Courtauld Gallery, London, and the National Gallery. She is a former fellow of the Center for Curatorial Leadership in New York. Caroline has curated and co-curated many exhibitions, including Bellini and the East, Love and Marriage in Renaissance Florence, Building the Picture, Architecture in Italian Renaissance Painting, one of my personal favorites, Duccio Caro in Dialogue, and Mantegna and Bellini. She has also published widely on European art from the Middle Ages to the 12th century, particularly the art of the Italian Renaissance. And I think many of you here know she had a major role in the extraordinary Siena exhibition at the Metropolitan just a few months ago. In 2023, her book, The Power of Art, was published with Bridge Street Press. Please know that we do have copies of that book and the Osborne catalog that will be available for sale following the talk tonight. Caroline studied modern art history at the University College, Oxford, and has an MA and PhD from the Courtauld Institute of Art, the University of London. She is a strong advocate for widening participation and digital engagement in museums. Her interest in art history developed after a visit to the National Gallery of Ireland as a teenager, and she wants all young people to be able to see and enjoy great art. Dr. Judith Stapleton received her PhD from Yale University in 2023 and her MA from the University of Bristol in 2016. She works on British and Irish art from the 19th to the early 20th century, with a focus on art and politics, histories of modernism, internationalism in the arts, and the First World War. In addition to being the co-curator of Homecoming, the Walter Osborne exhibition upstairs, which I'm sure most of you have enjoyed many times, Judith has curated exhibitions on John Ruskin, prints and ephemera from the First World War, contemporary drawing and American landscape painting at the Yale Center for British Art, the Royal West of England Academy, and the Phillips Museum of Art. She is currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Keough-Naughton Institute for Irish Studies. Just seemingly moments or days ago, she also organized a conference in Belfast on the S.B. Kennedy archives that the Hesburgh Library has just acquired. So please join me in welcoming two very special guests, a known friend and a new friend to the stage. Judith, Caroline.
So Caroline, thank you so much for being here. Oh my gosh, I'm so loud. It's wonderful to have you, and we really appreciate you flew in very late last night, so you've had quite a packed day. But welcome to the University of Notre Dame.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here. I've had such a warm welcome in my so far less than 24 hours here, and I'm really looking forward to staying over the weekend and experiencing a lot of the variety that Notre Dame has to offer. And it's a real honor to be in conversation with you here tonight, Judith.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We have quite a varied audience here. We have students, we have members of the community, many of whom will have been to Dublin and know the National Gallery of Ireland, but some of whom may not have. So can you tell us a little bit about the National Gallery of Ireland and what you do there?
Well, be careful. That'd be a question I could go on for quite a long time. But the National Gallery of Ireland is one of Europe's greatest art collections, and it's the only place in the world where you can see Irish art from 1600 to the 21st century, really, with objects of the highest quality. So you can walk through European art and Irish art in this one reasonably small space just off Merrion Square in the heart of Dublin. What really inspires me about the gallery is apart from its extraordinary collection, is the long history of public service and public engagement. The gallery was founded 171 years ago, and it was founded just as Ireland came out of the terrible trauma of the famine, the event which really defines Ireland in the 19th and the early 20th centuries. And the gallery was founded by the state, but one individual was really important in it, and I want to say a bit about him because he really inspires me. He was a railway engineer called William Dargan. He came from Cork. He was a self-made man, and he set up a railway network that went over all of Ireland, got a bit battered in the 1960s and 70s, but is still with us. And he thought that everybody should have great art in their lives. So he got the state, the government, to found the National Gallery and placed it in Merrion Square in the center of the city, near the public transport that he'd been building, so that as many people could go there as possible. And we know that the gallery has always been a place for people and a place for a whole variety of visitors in Dublin, and that city centre site is really part of it.
Yeah, it's really in the heart of the city. So you were speaking today earlier with students about the kinds of visitors who come to the National Gallery. What's your demographic or your desired demographic?
Our demographic is very, very varied. We're like the Raclin, we're a free for access museum. There is no entrance charge to come in. And last year we had about 1 million visitors. We had 1 million visitors, just over that, which when you consider the population of the island of Ireland is just over 7 million, and the state of Ireland is 5.5. That is a significant number of people who visited. And I was very struck when I moved back to Ireland a couple of years ago after living for many years in London. You know that classic conversation when you get into a taxi and the driver says, "What do you do? Where do you work?" I mean, most people, when I said I worked for the National Gallery in London, they were like, "Oh, where's that?" And I would say, "It's on Trafalgar Square." And they'd be like, "Oh, okay." But they rarely visited. My anecdotal experience of being in a taxi in Dublin is that most taxi drivers have visited. Some of them don't like it. Most of them do. But they can always tell you something about it. And the sense that the gallery is present in people's lives in the city is really palpable. But there's always more we can do, and we try and work particularly with those people who find even a doorway, even a museum building, to be something that is slightly restrictive when they're worried about coming in. So we do a lot of work with schools in education, but also with our local communities, our hyper-local communities, as well as those around Ireland. And I think a lot about what it means to be a National Gallery of Ireland and what it means in terms of that geography. And really, I think we're there to serve everybody on the island if we can.
Wow. Thank you for that. We've borrowed so many wonderful works from the National Gallery of Ireland for the Walter Osborne exhibition. My clicker is not working, so I wonder if we could advance to a following slide if possible. And so, yeah, it's been amazing to bring those to America, maybe for the first time. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about Walter Osborne, having just seen the collection upstairs. I put a picture of the Guinness portrait in your gallery, and then...
Well, I hesitate saying anything about Walter Osborne in front of one of the co-curators of the exhibition, who knows so much about him and about the works of art. But Walter Osborne is a very beloved artist in Dublin. In fact, I'd say he's one of the most popular artists in our collection with our Dublin audience. People really know his pictures of the Dublin streets. There's a wonderful picture upstairs in the exhibition of people sitting on a bench in Stephen's Green in the main park of the city. That is a really, really, really loved picture. So Osborne had a short life. He had a very sadly protracted, he really could have done so much more. His paintings are full of light, they're full of love, And increasingly, I think they're also full of social engagement, of real interest in his common man and woman. Although you might get less of that sense from the picture that it was on the screen. He wasn't so often, was he, Judith, a society portraitist?
Yeah.
But this is one of his greatest portraits in this genre.
Yeah, and it's amazing that it's come to the National Gallery of Ireland because it hadn't been there for quite a long time. It was fun. We were just doing a study day for the Walter Osborne exhibition at the gallery. We were able to use the amazing archives in the Centre for the Study of Irish Art. But it was also great to see what works replaced many of the Osbornes, which are almost kind of permanently hung there because we stole them all for this exhibition.
Well, we were very, very happy to lend them and to be part of this really important exhibition. It's important also for us as custodians of one of the greatest collections of, if not the greatest collection of Irish artists in the world, to be able to share that generously and for people to see that outside Ireland and to really have a greater appreciation of it and a greater understanding of it. And we have in Ireland a scheme which enables works to come to the state, sometimes but in lieu of taxation, and this was one of them. I also love it because, of course, it's a society picture, and it's of a member of the Guinness family and her daughter, but she was very socially engaged. She was famous for her costume and her dress, but also what she did in Dublin. And I think Osborne, he was very sensitive to family relationships. He was very, very close to his young niece, who essentially he lived in a household with and helped bring her up. And so you often get a clear sense of relationships between mothers, fathers, children's families in his pictures, as you do here. I also love the magnificent frame, which you can see in the picture on the screen, which has been part of the work, I think, all its life.
So when you miss the work, when it's not on display here anymore, you can go back to Ireland and to the National Gallery and see it. This is just an interior shot of some of the rooms for people who might not know the collection. But you're also very well known for non-Irish work. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the museum as a European collection of art.
So national galleries, interestingly, are generally not restricted to the art of their national school. Think of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, think of the National Gallery of Ireland, think of the National Scotland, many, many others. And so we show great art, basically, in the Western tradition from many different places. We show some American art too, but our collection is really focused on European and the Irish within that. And I would say that to our audience in Dublin, people come to see Walter Osborne, they come to see Jack B. Yeats, they particularly come to see Yeats's Liffey Swim, but they also come to see one of the greatest European collections on public display for free anywhere in Europe. And two pictures that people come back to again and again are these two on the screen. I would say, together with the work of Jack B. Yeats, they're probably the icons of the museum. And wherever we move them overnight, people will find them within a very short space of time. The Caravaggio, which you can see behind me, is a painting that was only discovered 35 years ago. It was in a Jesuit house in Leeson Street in the centre of Dublin. It had been there since the 1930s. It had been bought by an Irish doctor who had been widowed. Her husband actually had been an officer in the RIC, and he had been killed during the War of Independence. And she brought this picture back to Ireland. She was a very devout lady. She gave it to the Jesuits. And in the 1980s, a former colleague of mine at the gallery, Sergio Benedetti, who was one of our senior conservators and a very good art historian as well, he saw this picture in the house on Leeson Street, and he began to wonder, you may know the story, if it was this lost painting by Caravaggio that had disappeared in the 18th century of the taking of Christ. And at the same time, two young art historians in Italy were working on the family archives of the Mattei family, where it was made for, and together they made the connection. And so we have this painting which was lost for hundreds of years on our wall. And although it's a relatively recent addition to the gallery, only like 35 years ago, it's incredibly popular. I think not just for the name Caravaggio, but also for the moment of drama that is depicted here, of course, of the taking of Christ being evident by the kiss of betrayal. St. John, who's at the far right-hand side of the picture, is screaming in horror, but what I love is Christ himself, his resignation on his face, and also his hands, and Caravaggio himself, who's popped up into the picture, holding the lantern, looking in at the scene. So everyone loves this picture. Everyone also loves the Vermeer that you can see a detail of. There are 37 paintings by him in the world, by one account, 35 by another. This is one of the ones that people don't argue about. And again, he has such a simple cast of characters in his paintings, such a simple repertoire, but he always makes it just seem different because he makes you go into it too. I think that's an interesting connection actually between him and Caravaggio. In their very different ways, they make the viewer enter into the experience as well.
Yeah. I will say I was in a taxi in Dublin and they did ask me if I'd seen the Caravaggio at the National Gallery of Ireland, so I can attest to that. It was interesting, I had asked what the most popular exhibitions have been in kind of recent history in the gallery, and of course the Vermeer and the Caravaggio show have been some of your most successful. These are the other ones, Sorolla, Spanish Master of Light, Women Impressionists, and Turner. So does this surprise you, or?
Well, this is in terms of visitor numbers, and they are, of course, only one way of measuring metrics and measuring success. But there is a strong appetite for art of the highest quality in Dublin, and our collection enables us to develop these international partnerships to bring exhibitions of this sort to the city and to work with our peer institutions. Irish art is a very important part of our mission, and one of the shows that I'm really surprised is not on this tally was the great Lavery show that we did a few years ago. John Lavery, born in Belfast, trained in Glasgow, very strongly connected to Dublin throughout his life, an artist who was really an artist of our islands, or of the archipelago, as one architectural historian told me was the best way of dealing with the complexity of the naming in Britain and Ireland last week. We did this show a couple of years ago, which was really, really popular, but still, I think because people can see Irish art in the gallery all the time, Irish art exhibitions perhaps don't have as strong a visitor numbers as the objects that people might not think they can see in the country. But we have a very strong mission to be promoting Irish art, of course, in our galleries, but also in other places as well. And that's why the loan here from the National Gallery of Ireland and from the Hugh Lane is so important. We are working on a number of big Irish art exhibitions for the next few years at the moment, including a show about the concept of the West of Ireland, what it means, not just in terms of landscape, but what it means in terms of emotion and people. And earlier this year, I was really proud that we were able to do a show on two of the artists who I consider among the most important Irish artists of the 20th century, and that's Evie Hone and Ménie Jellett. Wonderful modernists who trained in Paris, spent their lives really living between Dublin, Paris, and a little bit in Lyon as well. Well known in Ireland to circle of art lovers, but not to anyone else. And introducing artists people don't know so well into your exhibition program, I think, is also really key in terms of building taste, building interest, and building a love of these things for the future.
Yeah. All the Irish art currently, or much of it, is in these kind of long corridors in the core of the building. Yeah. And you mentioned you're doing a major rehang in 2027. Do you want to tell us a bit about this?
Yes, we're planning in 2017. The gallery reopened after a major refurbishment of our historic parts of the gallery. We're now working on a master plan to build a new building next to the gallery in a car park that we have on our site, which will give us the first learning centre in a Museum of Ireland, our first purpose-built conservation centre, and a place where our incredible archive, particularly of Irish art, but also the greatest art history library in Ireland, can be studied. But before we do that, we are reconsidering the collection at the 10th year anniversary of the refurbishment. And that gives us an opportunity to really think about how we present our collections, what it means to be an art gallery, particularly what it means to be the National Gallery of Ireland in the 2020s. And I'd like our Irish art to be presented in a way that if you've never seen Irish art before, which is true for our visitors from abroad, that they will really see the strength of it in a very visual presentation. So not just admire an art historical progression, but things that excite them visually. Because these pictures excite us visually all the time. And I'd love our visitors who don't know the collection as well as those who do, to feel that sense of buzz. I still remember, my mother first brought me to the collection when I was 14. She took me to see two paintings, one of which was Lady Lavery's great portrait of Lavery's wife and daughters in his studio in London, and she talked to me about it for a few minutes, and then we went and had a cup of tea. It was such a lovely introduction to looking at art.
Yeah, that's amazing. Every time I go to the gallery, I'm impressed. I see new paintings. You have a very robust kind of acquisition profile and kind of new work coming in. We've just put 3 on the screen. Can you tell us a little bit about what you collect and what stories you want to tell through these new acquisitions?
So we collect across the range of our collections. So we collect very strongly in Irish art, also more broadly in European art. And in Irish art, we are focusing a lot at the moment, not exclusively. We'll always buy great objects whenever we have an opportunity to acquire them, by gift, by purchase, by other means. But we're really focusing strategically on the 20th century because we have a collection that is really stellar up until about 1930. After there, we have great works, but we have more gaps, and we really need that collection to be really strong, as we are the central place in the world where you can see the chronology of the art of our nation. So 2 works, they just about fit into the 20th century here. Roderick O'Connor at the far side of the screen. I mean, he's an artist who it's difficult to categorize. He's from County Roscommon. He spends most of his life in France. He marries a French woman. He comes back to Ireland regularly. He actually draws incomes from his land in Ireland for a long time, but he is not really part of life in Ireland in a very coherent way. And yet we consider him as Irish, and he considered himself, we think, as Irish and as French. Anyway, great painter, works with Van Gogh, doesn't work with Van Gogh, sorry, I'm confused. He knows Van Gogh. He works with Gauguin in Pont-Aven, in this artist colony in Brittany. And he makes these very extraordinary revolutionary paintings with stripes for a short period. There are 17 of them in the world. Most of them are in public collections. We didn't have one. One came up at auction, and I was holding my breath, crossing every digit I had, and we managed to acquire it. It's a fantastic picture.
It's absolutely gorgeous. We don't have any striped ones, but we do have some Roderick O'Connors in the collection. So if you want to see them, contact Cheryl Snay, who's the curator of European art, or Joe, and they will be able to show them to you. So a plug there for the Raclin Murphy collection. Also the wonderful new Jack B. Yeats.
Yeah, Jack B. Yeats would be the Irish artist who in Ireland people would most know. And in Dublin, the painting that people most love is his Liffey Swim. Those foolhardy people who every autumn swim up the River Liffey. And when we take that picture off display, which is very rarely again, we get bitter complaints. But we have 38 paintings by Yeats in the collection and a whole lot more works on paper. We hold his entire archive of sketchbooks, which came to us from the Yeats family in the 1990s. But Yeats very interesting. He makes very few paintings that are political. He lived, of course, through very turbulent, very changing times for Ireland. He was part of a family who were hugely involved in that. Think of his brother, the poet. Think also even of his two sisters in different ways as well. But Jack is not interested really very explicitly in politics, rather like Walter Osborne, who says he isn't. Maybe he's a bit more than he says he is, but Jack B. Yeats doesn't seem to be very much, and he makes three paintings that are political in that they refer to events of his time. And one of them is this painting which we were able to acquire at the very, very end of last year and put on the wall earlier this year. It's a painting, as you can see, it's called Singing the Dark Rosaline, and it's entitled Croke Park, 1921. Now, we all know what happened at Croke Park in November 1920. Many of us in this room know the beautiful, beautiful 16th century song, Roisin Dubh, The Dark Rosaline, which became, in the 19th century particular, to be a lament for Ireland. And Yeats knew Croke Park and the vicinity of it really well, and as my colleague Brendan Rooney, who I think is coming here in a few weeks' time, might be able to tell you, Yeats' painting doesn't look like Croke Park because you don't see the stadium, but he visited the site very carefully, and where he's painting these people is just beside where they went in to the stadium, where the stand where the atrocity happened was. Brendan can tell you much more about this. He's really worked it out very carefully with the curator of history at Croke Park. So it's very specifically that place and that moment, and you can see the man singing, the two men singing with the fiddler in the centre. It's a very moving painting. It's quite small. It's about this size, and I think Yeats's marvel is that he doesn't need to show you what actually happened. He knows that his audiences know it, but he's wanting you to think and to reflect on what that might mean.
So one of the ways art at a National Gallery tells a story of kind of history of the nation as well. And of course, the beautiful still life with flowers, which kind of pulls out some of that European kind of art.
Yes, and also the diversification of the collection. This is a work by an artist who worked really in the Netherlands in the 17th and 18th century. Her name was Raclin. I can never pronounce that properly. It's that Dutch guttural stop. And she was one of the pioneering still life paintings of really Enlightenment and Baroque Europe. She was the daughter of a scientist. We know that she thought and looked a lot about what objects are, and her still life paintings, of which there are several hundred, are incredibly particular and meticulous depictions of flowers, of objects, of insects, and of things. She spent a lot of her career working for some of the greatest patrons in Europe, including the Electress Palatine, and we were able to acquire this work by her in 2023. It's one of the things about the art of the past that there are relatively few works that were made by women. And I think it's important to many of us who work in museums and who work in art history generally today to be trying to diversify that narrative, trying to put women on the walls when we can. And sometimes it's not by making acquisitions. Sometimes it's by mentioning in a label the woman who commissioned a work of art, thinking for earlier things, often the nuns who commissioned objects, who made objects in convents. But here we were able to buy a painting by Raclin and to add it to the collection. It's actually the first still life flower painting in our collection. We have lots of paintings of still lives in other genres, but not in still life. So it's a lovely, lovely addition, and one I know that many museums are very jealous of as well at the moment.
All the good work is coming to Ireland. Speaking of gender, I guess, and art, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story, switching gears to the personal? Like, how did you become the director of the National Gallery of Ireland, a role in which you are the first woman director? there?
Well, I hope I became the director of the National Gallery of Art because I have a real love of the gallery and of the difference that it can make in people's lives, and also because I have, I've spent many years working in art museums internationally, and I'd always hoped I would come back to Ireland, but I'd never thought it would be possible. And I feel so honoured to be in this role. And it means a lot to be the first woman doing this job in 160 odd years, and also actually to be the first person from the 9 counties of Ulster. One of the reasons I was very keen to take up this role was because I think a National Gallery of Ireland means having a role for Ireland which is not involved in politics, it's completely separate to that, but finding ways in which we can bring people together, finding ways for there to be conversations about subjects which can be difficult. Art galleries can really do that and can convene, and I've been very, very proud of being able to work more with our colleagues in Northern Ireland and actually more widely across the island in the 2 and a bit years that I've been in the role. But yes, the question of being a woman, I hope it won't be a question that people ask in 20 or years' time, that it's not a strange thing to be. I mean, doing this sort of job, I'm just very, very pleased to be doing the job and to be there.
Yeah. Your point about Northern Ireland brings me to another question. This event is co-sponsored by the Raclin Murphy Museum of Art and the Keough-Naughton Institute for Irish Studies, which is based in the Keough School of Global Affairs. So we may have some professors and students in the audience from that school. Can you speak to this role that you're edging out about what role art can play in kind of on a global stage in terms of policy and peace building and kind of other efforts of diplomacy?
Well, I mean, art is not diplomacy, but I think what museums are able to do, because they are spaces which are open to everybody, but they're also spaces where conversations of all sorts can take place, conversations that are really, that come about because of the objects on the walls, the stories they tell, the relationships they draw, the public as well as the personal ones, that museums can and should play a role in enabling sometimes difficult conversations to take place. And in terms of Ireland and the National Gallery of Ireland, I think it's really important for there to be the sharing of expertise, the sharing of art, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of common stories, and also of a shared sense of place and of identities. And I use that word very, very carefully, because as someone who grew up in Northern Ireland and who lived through the Troubles, I'm a great respecter of people's personal points of views and people's differences, but I think understanding others and thinking about them in the context of your own is really what we need to do. We need to be continuing to build a society in Ireland where people are aware of other people and of the different communities they might be from. And I think also museums have a role to play in that, because certainly in Northern Ireland, despite many fantastic attempts at integrated education and for conversations between different types of schools, still many people from communities don't come across people from the other community as much as they might have done. And last year in 2024, we lent the great Caravaggio we were looking at together a few minutes ago to Belfast, where it was reunited with its pair, which normally hangs in the National Gallery in London. The 2 pictures were there for the space of about 4 months. I went to see them a lot during the time they were there in Belfast, together with about 76,000 other people. And I was really, really struck by the quietness and the quiet conversations and exchange that those 2 pictures really drew from visitors. It was a remarkable experience. Because of Belfast's history, people are very proud of the city, but they're also quite deprecating. And the thing I heard more and more in the room was, how are we worthy of having these 2 Caravaggios in Belfast, but a sense of great pride that they were there. So by projects like that, but also increasingly by the work we do in museum education, I do hope that there are ways together we can build a sense of place for everyone, a space for everyone in Ireland that's completely separate from politics.
I think I'm a little out of order here, but I also have a picture of your book on the screen, so The Power of Art, which is really, you call this a human history of art. Do you want to talk a bit about your work as a scholar? Of course, the amazing Siena exhibition that Joe was raising as well. How does this inform how you approach art as the director of the gallery?
Oh gosh, I want people to approach art by having a connection with it, of it being something which potentially can change their lives, and can certainly give pleasure, can give solace, can give interest. And often for me, that is about putting the human story back into objects, into buildings, into collections. Because when you see an object on the wall of a museum, you're invited to appreciate and to really, in some ways, worship the quality of the making, the quality of the work that went into producing it. But these are also objects that have a human story. I work a lot on art of the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, and that art is generally made for a very particular purpose. Much of it is made for devotional purposes, and what's lost sometimes is the stories and lives of the people who used those objects. And I suppose that was really the conceit for me for thinking about this book. It was a book about artists, which was about people and the people who use art as well as the people who make it. And I love traveling, I love visiting. I once said to my husband I'd love to time travel if it was possible. And I think what I've always loved about being a historian as well as an art historian is that ability to do that, to pop up in a number of times and places. And we can all do this actually in the context of a museum. You look at something that was made 1,000 years ago or made 2 years ago, and you don't know the person who made it, but there is hopefully some sense of connection or relationship.
You mentioned in the book that you wrote it during COVID.
I did.
Yes. And have you seen a change in how visitors are using the museum since COVID, or is it just right back to old patterns?
I don't think things are ever always completely the same. I mean, the experience that we all had of living so separately for such a long time, of course that makes a big impact. And I'm the mother of 2 children who were 10 and 11 when that happened, and now are teenagers, and I see the impact on their cohort all the time in the way that they, mental health issues are much more significant than they might have been, or certainly much more noticed than they might have been, and that's a good thing. They're anxious. So in terms of how I think people greet museums, I think people are more open to using technology, which is a good thing. So if you can't get to a museum or a collection, you can have some of that experience from your home. The talks that we delivered in Dublin online then, we've continued. We now get, thousands of people turning up to something that previously we might have had 200 in person. I think that's really, really important and significant. But one of the most moving things I've experienced in my life was being in an art gallery, the art gallery I used to work for, not the one I do now, on the day that we reopened after COVID, and myself and my boss and friend, Gabriele Finaldi, we stood in the foyer. We couldn't shake people's hands because it was COVID, we were wearing masks, but we said hello and greeted everybody who came in the door. And we were both very, very struck by how people said, we're coming back to be with our friends. And I think that emotional engagement, which people often have with pictures, was really exacerbated by COVID and the experience of not being with them.
Yeah. I think.
What do you think, Judith, from your experience of living through that time?
Well, I agree with you, and we were talking earlier with the students about museums as places where you go for connection, and then also for having these kind of feelings of returning to works of art. We had Siobhan Keegan was here to see the Walter Osborne show, the Lady Chief Justice of Northern Ireland, and she was speaking about how she missed these paintings that were on our wall, and she was going to head straight over to the National Gallery of Ireland to see them again. So this experience you have when you live with a work of art, and it seeps into you. But we were also talking about museums as places that can do something different in the contemporary moment of being kind of restful, kind of retreats from the anxiety of technology and from the city. And you were speaking about that earlier.
Yes, I think that in this world where we're bombarded by things all the time, it can be wonderful to go into a space, not where the technology is not there, because we all like taking pictures. I like taking pictures of pictures I see on my phone, but to have a moment of respite, or even moments. The students who we met earlier were telling me about their experience of slow looking. When you're challenged to spend, they were saying actually 75 minutes with a work of art, but I'd suggest you try doing that for 5 to begin with, and see what happens. You notice such different things from prolonged looking, and prolonged looking is not the thing we do at the moment with our technological devices. We're always scrolling, we're always moving forward to the next thing. And what also is great about a museum such as this museum or the National Gallery of Ireland is that there are a variety of spaces. So there are spaces where people can be quiet. There are also spaces where people can run around and be noisy. And one of the things I always most enjoy in my job is seeing school children happily chatting, not being told to be quiet as they walk through the galleries. Behavior of all sorts, as long as it's respectful, is what we should do.
I maybe only have 2 more questions before we open it up to the floor. But one of them is about this point about museums also being a place for education, which you're raising there. We're obviously at a university museum, and so the big interest here is using artwork to teach classes and also to do scholarship. You at the gallery have an amazing Centre for the Study of Irish Art, an amazing gallery archive, a beautiful conservation lab.
Not purpose-built, I'm afraid. Camping in a gallery space. I'd much rather have it as a gallery space and have a really wonderful new conservation facility. But we do great work there.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about what this offers you, how this kind of expands or enriches the collection at the National Gallery?
Well, museums have always been, collections should always be studied, because when collections are studied, we have new ideas and new thoughts about it. And I spent 8 years as a curator in a university art museum, so I really embrace and believe in learning through looking, learning through engaging with objects, and also the variety of approaches that can be brought to collections from a university context. So we're increasingly trying to do some of that in the work we do in Dublin, in partnerships with universities through developing our fellowship program in our Centre for Study for Irish Art, opportunities for people to come and work with us in temporary positions, which hopefully will then end up into longer partnerships as well too, and also how we can make manifest what could be called the behind-the-scenes work, this work that always goes on because the gallery is a research institution, in a different way to a university, but in a parallel and complementary way, how we can give people access to this learning, to this knowledge, to these approaches. So we've been doing that digitally by putting a lot of our Irish art archive collection on a database called Source, which I encourage you to look at if you haven't already. We're putting more and more of that up there, and we also enable people to curate it and make their own selections on it as well too. By our conservation team, their work happens in studios that are closed because we have, there's security aspects, but putting films about treatments on YouTube, encouraging our visitors to engage with our conservators in talks, sometimes even allowing people a window into the studio to see work being done, just to understand that this work is not kept behind doors because we're hiding it, but because there are particular requirements really of security and also of the staff, but finding ways in which we can really make the invisible visible.
Well, and last, an open-ended question. What are the major challenges or perhaps opportunities that you see for art in Ireland, at the National Gallery of Ireland, national galleries in general at this moment?
Challenges and opportunities, gosh. So I see a real opportunity at the National Gallery of Ireland because of the stellar collection we have and the engagement that already there exists with the population in Ireland, but the chance to do so much more. I'd love to see we work a lot outside Dublin. I'd love to see us doing more in that camp. We're lending to regional art collections in Letterkenny, in Waterford, in Limerick, in Galway, but how we can build those into deeper programs of engagement, using a loan to work with the gallery, but also to work with local schools, to really create a sense of the gallery being for communities, not just for one community that comes to us in Dublin. So that's one area I'd really love we will be continuing to develop. Also developing our international partnerships, and that means bringing art to Ireland, but also making Irish art much better known outside the island as well too. I think of Scandinavian art and how it's really well known in the art world today. It wasn't 20 years ago. We have an opportunity with Irish art. It's of such high quality. It's extraordinary. Its connections to literature and music are also ones to really work more with, and I'd love to see more people gain enjoyment from the riches of the Irish visual art world.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll open up for further questions. I know we have a very mixed audience here, so ask your questions to Dr. Caroline Campbell, Director of the National Gallery of Ireland.
How are you? As one early modernist to another, I was wondering about the relationship of the Irish people over time to graphic art and telling that story. Because in many respects, when people think of the Irish, they think of music, think of the ear rather than, the eye or design in that sense before a certain era. In what way can one build a narrative about graphic art in Ireland? How far back can that go? And I mean, how does that deal with, I suppose, material wealth, poverty, etc. in the past?
Thank you. So the question, graphic art, I assume by that you're meaning works on paper. Oh, visual arts, the visual arts. Sorry. So people have always made art in Ireland. You look at Newgrange, look at extraordinary objects. There's always been a visual imagination and great visual talent. But I suppose in the last few centuries, or certainly, I think it's because of the written word. Irish art has not been perhaps as well known as the other art forms. But on the other hand, speaking from the perspective as director of the National Gallery of Ireland, I run a gallery where many more people per capita of the population visit than in any other comparable national gallery in Europe. I think there is an awareness of visual art. There's a love of it. Maybe we haven't done so well in promoting that outside the country. I'd love to talk to you more about that. I certainly think that there's a great product. There's a great history there. And I think probably the answer is not to separate it from the book or from music, but to see them all as of course different elements of one story.
Question up here.
I've been very pleased to see the architecture and the sculptures of Ireland, and I didn't see any sign that you have that in your gallery. Do you have examples?
So we have, our collection has been historically focused on painting, on the graphic arts, so works on paper, and stained glass to a certain extent. We have a small collection of sculpture. I'd love to develop it further. Our best known sculptures actually are not works by Irish artists. We have a Canova, which is extremely beautiful. We have a great number of 18th century busts. Most of our Irish sculpture collection is portraits of the 18th century and of the early 20th century. And in a future acquisition strategy, we do want to work on sculpture. Yeah, it would be great to have more of that on view in the National Collection. But other national galleries just do paintings, so actually we could do more in that area.
Hi, thank you so much for such a riveting conversation. I have to say that, Judith, you did an incredible job as a moderator.
Thank you.
Because every question that I had in my brain coming in here, and as I was thinking, down to the last one, I was going to ask Caroline about the challenges of directing the National Gallery. You already were on top of it, and so I thought, gosh, what could I even ask that hasn't been covered by such a really rich conversation? So I thought I'd ask about your book a little bit more. What led you, being a scholar, but you're also a curator, and you're a museum director, so you're already very invested in more public-facing work and reaching a broader audience than, say, an art historian who's only within a university setting. I was wondering what animated you to write this book for a more general audience, if those were similar or different impulses that led you to curation.
Very, very interesting question. Exactly the same impulses. From the first day I worked in a museum, I knew it was the right job for me because it was about the objects, the collections I love, but it was about people. And I've never wanted to be far away from that and from visitors. So, I think scholarship is fundamental. We all need scholarship. Nothing is possible without it. But I think that there are still not very many ways into what could be called art history or could be called just looking at objects in a historical context from a general perspective. And I was really inspired, this may seem very vainglorious, by Ernst Gombrich, who wrote, I think, the most beautiful book called The Story of Art, which was published 75 years ago. It's a book that has been much criticized in the last few years, and it is a book that is very much of its time. There is no doubt, and I don't think there are very few, if no women in it. But it is also a book written that is so inspired by the love of looking and by the importance that looking has to your life. Gombrich lost practically every member of his family in the Second World War. And he writes this book, which is about optimism. And that book really inspired me. And I wanted to try and write a book that was never going to be anywhere near as good as Gombrich because he was a genius, but something that had some of that spirit of really wanting people to look and to think and to look at what you see around us. Art is not just what's in museums. Art is also what's in the streets. It's living in a city or in a town that is well designed. It's having a coffee cup you really enjoy using every day in your hand. It's having something beautiful in your life, really, and that was what I wanted to write about. But also about the difficulties that beauty brings. A lot of the most beautiful objects have been made by some of the most heinous individuals, and I am very much interested in that relationship between power and the production of art and architecture.
I think that's a wonderful place to end, unless we have any last burning questions. Right here.
What did you think of the telling of the tale of its discovery by Jonathan Haar in his book, The Lost Painting.
I love that book. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's a book written to encourage people to find out more about the story. It's a totally different type of book to an art historical inquiry, but I think it's an extremely good book of its genre, and I devoured it.
Well, thank you so much for coming all the way to South Bend. It's been wonderful to be here.